What we were doing here was making illustration much more graphic, much more immediate, much more expressive. It wasn't doing art for art's sake. It was doing it because the work had to be beautiful, but also had to say something. And that went on for about almost 25 years.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomrin is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey Joey, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This cliche, which has its origins in newspaper ads and articles from the early 1900s, refers both to the limits of language and the power of images to express ideas, capture sentiments, and conjure up emotions. Well, if a single picture is worth 1,000 words, then today's guest, who began illustrating professionally in the 1940s, is responsible for millions of words.
We're honored to talk with Seymour Chwast, one of the most highly regarded graphic designers in American history. In 1954, he founded the design group Pushpin Studios with Milton Glaser, Edward Sorel, and Reynold Ruffins. Seymour has executed hundreds of advertising campaigns, designed multiple popular typefaces, and illustrated numerous books. His new book, an illustrated adaptation of Mark Twain's War Prayer, was just published by Fantagraphics. Seymour, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Hi.
Your interest in drawing and design started early on when you saw Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the theater in 1937. That movie was, of course, revolutionary. It was the first cell animated feature and the first animated feature produced in the U.S. What about it sparked your artistic awakening?
Yeah, well, did a great job. Also, Pinocchio was pretty good at that. Yeah, I thought I'd become an animator and move to Hollywood and become a rock star, but I didn't do any of those things.
As mentioned, you co-founded Pushpin Studios, the influential design and illustration firm, back in 1954. The studio's iconic designs and illustrations, enshrined in the Pushpin graphic magazine, published from 1957 to 1980, eschewed the numbing rigidity of modernism and the rote sentimental realism of commercial illustration. How did Pushpin Studios come about?
Well, we were classmates at Cooper Union, and we all wanted to draw as well as learn about typography. If you want to do typography, you become a graphic designer. But I and my classmates wanted to draw as well. So there was an advantage there. And we thought we really had something to contribute to the field. I produced a promotion piece called the Pushpin Almanac. That's where we got the name Pushpin. And it was in the style of the old Farmer's Almanac. And we sent out 3,000 of those to the kind of clients we wanted to get, editors and publishers and art directors. And it worked to a certain extent. But after graduation, I got a job at the New York Times, which was terrific because I was able to do my own drawings, doing, the house ads. And I learned about type. And I did that for about a year, and then I moved on. Ed and Milton and Reynold went off, did their own thing. Ed and I, we got fired at about it. Each of us got fired from 5 or 6 jobs during a year because we didn't know how to do fancy lettering. That's what the agencies wanted. And we couldn't do that. So we decided to form a studio because the Pushpin Almanac started to work. We did a Pushpin graphic, a more ambitious promotion piece that we sent out, each one on a different subject, and that brought us work. And using our interest in type as well as illustration, we were able to produce material that really mattered.
It seemed like you were able over time to develop sort of a school and a brand. Was that intentional, or did it sort of just develop from trial and error and maybe looking at each other's work and that sort of thing?
Well, we had what was called the pushpin style, which was, in terms of illustration, much more graphic. Right? It wasn't sentimental the way most illustration was being done in those days. And I like doing woodcuts, and I did that for work quite often. We learned from the Europeans, who were ahead of us in sort of graphic illustration.
Were there any particular inspirations?
Yeah, and well, in magazines, the Europeans were putting out the terrific magazines that was stylized, and then there's a sort of this what was going on in the fine art field impressed us as well. So we went along with the interest in Art Deco and Art Nouveau, and it moved up. First was Art Nouveau, then Art Deco, and it sort of moved up the line, and artwork was being done in those styles. And then we became more modern.
Are there any designs that you particularly admire?
I mean, there are artists that I knew and loved, Saul Steinberg was one of them, a whole bunch of them. My design is nothing better than the FedEx logo. I look at that and I admire it so much here, and glad that I can call myself a designer because of that. Nike is pretty good too. In terms of illustration, I don't know what it is. There's so few places for illustrators to work. Like you can look at the New Yorker and maybe the New York Times, but that's pretty much it, and it's sort of sad. I mean, from what I understand, illustrators still work. They find work one way or another. But I don't, it's hard to find. I don't see it very much, just because there are few outlets for it.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. Your work is distinct and recognizable, yet also eclectic and hard to pigeonhole. You've described it as the Roxy style. What's the origin of that term, and how would you characterize that style?
Yeah, I called it a Roxy style because I didn't know that it was Art Deco. We hadn't heard about that. And all of a sudden it came on the scene. Oh, that's what it is. That's what I've been doing. And it was very stylized, sort of tended to be geometric, very, very colorful. And some great work was being done that way in quite a few years.
Yeah, there is a heavy dose of humor in a lot of your work as well. Is that part of the Roxy style?
No, it's part of my style.
Right. So the style that you were calling Roxy was just kind of generally the Art Deco, and then your own style was the humor and the other sort of idiosyncratic elements you brought to it?
Yeah, well, one thing we were interested in old type. In school, we learned about Victorian typography and type that was wood type itself, which was interesting because typography was very useful because before there was engraving, before newspapers were able to have photographs appear, lettering and typography had to be decorative in order to create interest.
So speaking of which, you designed a number of fonts during the 1960s and 70s, including R-Tone, Blimp, Myopic, and Film Sense, which were used for, among other things, album covers for Janis Joplin, Funkadelic, Shada Na, and the musical Hair. What was the process of developing these fonts, and how did they get into the popular culture?
Well, it gets into popular culture because there's something there that attracts designers, and they find that they could use Either they were inspired by the work that I had done, or made something close to it. I mean, art tone, I developed that alphabet because I had to do packaging for an India ink called art tone, and I sort of came up with a style where the bottom of the letters sort of bulged out like ink that went crazy.
Yeah, and I guess you get these into catalogs, and advertisers and others are able to select what they like to use.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, art tone was imitated. There are other people picked up on it, did their own versions of it, and as well as other. We borrowed from each other here, and of course there's the classic typefaces that we always use.
Do you have patents on these as well?
Well, yeah, you can't copyright styles, unfortunately. The U.S. government doesn't recognize that, so it's too bad. You can copyright the name, but you can't copyright the style.
So it's essentially open for anyone to play around with.
Yep.
Is there still a big market for typography?
Well, type design is very big. There are very strong works being done with typographers. They are. It's very important to them. And very important to the field. It's terrific stuff being done. I mean, that is one area that is great. Designing types, and now it's easier with the computer to get to create those fonts.
Your new book, Mark Twain's War Prayer, uses a mixture of typography, design, painting, and drawing to adapt Twain's scathing poem exposing the fake patriotism and religious fervor that motivate war. You've done other projects with an anti-war message, including the book At War with War, 5,000 Years of Conquest, Invasions, and Terrorist Attacks, an illustrated timeline. What drew you to Twain's classic poem, and what's still relevant about it over 100 years later?
Because it's anti-war. It's a very sarcastic poem that Twain wrote. Really, really great. And I came upon it, and I used it for an issue of a magazine, the Pushpin Graphic. And then I thought, well, maybe we can make a book out of it. So it's a long poem, but I was able to include some of my anti-war paintings and other graphics to go along with it. So I'm very happy that the book is out, because it's something I feel very strong about.
How did you first get involved with the anti-war movement?
I really don't know. I mean, I was just a kid that came from the Bronx. I did have a cousin, a woman who was an anarchist, and very radical. She and her husband lived in Woodstock, New York, and they hand printed a magazine called Retort that had articles on the subject of anti-government pieces that she wrote. And I admired that. I admired the craft of what they were doing. They had a little shop on the side of a hill in Woodstock, where they, with a crazy press, where they put out this magazine. I admired that. I never went that far, although I did a book. I did hand print on a small press, a very small tabletop press, a book called The Book of Battles. I did linoleum cuts of battles. And my cousin wrote some quotes for me to go into the book, and I set type. I bought a font of type, Garamond, I remember, and set the type and printed the pages. The only thing I couldn't do was bind the book. So I had to take the pages to a binder who put it together. And it turned out pretty well. I made 80 copies.
Is there a Jewish component to your anti-war activism or any other aspect of your perspective on life?
I don't think so.
Well, I mean that the anarchist movement was quite populated by Jewish radicals.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe there's something in our blood that does that, makes us want to do crazy things or not do crazy things.
I think you're right. There are those who are extra careful, and then there are those who are making up for those who are extra careful.
Mm-hmm. And, about being a Jew is really nice, except cultured Jews are not so great. And they have giving Israelis and Jews over there a tough time. So it is a problem. Religion can get in the way.
Yeah, I'd say religion is the worst part about Judaism.
Yes. Yes. That's great. I have to remember that.
That's actually a big theme in Mark Twain's poem, the sort of toxic relationship of patriotism and religion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he was not religious at all. And patriotism, I thought, was just sad that people have taken up with that, go wherever your government tells you to go and fight whatever fight they say and must be done.
Some of the most effective images in war prayer have a childlike feel, as if they were drawn by children. These illustrations show tanks and soldiers firing their weapons, warplanes crashing into each other, parachuters escaping the wreckage, buildings burning, all in a way that, to me, paradoxically shows the futility of war and sort of a naive boyhood fascination with war. How did you go about adapting Twain's pointed words into images?
You think I secretly liked all those terrible things that people do to each other?
I know that you grew up in the World War II era, and you probably were inundated with a lot of propaganda and so forth as a boy.
Yeah, sure. But I learned that, war is, I guess, it's always going to happen. There are always wars going on. We have a few of them right now as we speak. And doing a book at War with War allowed me to list and show how terrible things have been for the last 5,000 years by listing every war that I could find since 3500 BC.
Yeah, and I think, portraying war in images is so powerful as opposed to just talking about it and reading about it in history books and so forth. I think you're able to capture not only the cyclical, never-ending nature of war, but also just how there really are no winners in war and everyone loses. And it's, the worst of humanity on display, as you said, constantly.
Right. Exactly. So I'm willing to take advantage of that and make a book. Well, it won't make me a lot of money, but I can make a living.
Yeah. Well, and you have great source material with Mark Twain for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that was great. Yeah, he wrote that about 1910, I think. He was against the Philippine War. We were imperialists in those days.
You're a nonagenarian, and you're still pushing the envelope and making incredible art. What's kept you going?
What else is there? No, I love to draw and design, and I love doing books. I started working on a book of all my work, and it'll take a while to gather it and put it together, but it'll be fun, I think, when it's done.
Well, we're looking forward to that. Thanks for joining us, Seymour.
Sure.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives. Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.